to a movie, and that movie happened to be Sybil. It was a story about a woman who was physically and emotionally abused by her mother, and she had split personalities, and she had voices in her head. I walked out of there and I could feel it in my whole body. I was so upset. And I remember thinking to myself, I have voices in my head. I have three. I had my own voice, I had my ego, and the third voice was this soft, almost whisper in my head. Sometimes it was a feeling in my body, and other times it was like, now do this. It would guide me in my decisions, but all of a sudden these three voices were looking like they were dangerous after seeing this movie. It dimmed my light. It was dangerous to be me again. And so I shut down and I disconnected.
Well, hello, Kris Vallin. Welcome to the show. I am truly honored by you joining me and looking forward to our conversation. How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling great and really excited to be here. Thanks, Brad.
Oh, good. Me too. Well, every week we bring you powerful stories about life after death, spiritual awakening, and what it takes to move beyond the illusion and discover your true self. And if that resonates, you'll love what's coming. Today's guest is Kris Vallin, someone I've known for most of my life, since middle school, in fact. It's not every day you get to sit down with a longtime friend who has completely transformed her life from the inside out. Kris Vallin went from being a high-performing CPA in the corporate world to a deeply intuitive spiritual counselor, helping people rewire their subconscious beliefs and reconnect with their true selves. She once said, "I thought I had the brass ring, yet I felt completely and utterly empty." And that moment of realization became the turning point, and it all started with a whisper from God. In this episode, we'll explore her awakening journey, her discovery of PSYCH-K, and how she now helps others release old programming, reclaim their intuition, and live from a place of purpose and inner alignment. If you ever felt like you were living someone else's life or wondered what it means to truly follow your heart, this conversation is for you. From CPA to spiritual counselor. Welcome, Kris.
Thank you, Brad. That was an awfully nice introduction. Thank you.
Of course. Well, I did sneak in there that we've known each other forever.
Yeah.
And I think it's amazing as we knew each other as kids, and here we are now. Amazing transformation over the course of our life. And today, you're here to share that story with this audience. And it's such an amazing story arc. So why don't you go ahead, and jump in from where the story begins.
That sounds great. So my story, we all have stories, don't we? And a lot of times we over-identify with them. So mine is the story of letting go of my story. So I have partitioned my life into two specific parts. There's life before PSYCH-K and life after PSYCH-K. And so the first part, before PSYCH-K, was what I call my asleep period, or maybe a little bit like amnesia. And basically what happened is I had four very specific memories from my childhood that helped shape who and what I was doing in my life. So the first one, these memories haunted me at times. And the interesting thing is the first one, a little graphic, sorry, but I was molested by a trusted neighbor. And I couldn't believe that it happened. I was only 6 years old. I had no way to process what had happened to me. And rather than being mad at the guy, I made it mean something. So we're human and we're meaning-making machines. And I walked away from that experience with all the shame that something was really wrong with me, that it's not safe to be me, and that don't ever draw attention to yourself. So that was my first experience that really shaped my life. The second one was much nicer. In that particular experience, I call it talking to God experience. I was 8 years old. I was outside drawing chalk. I can tell you what I was wearing and where I was on the driveway. And my mom comes flying out of the house. She goes, "Come on, we got to get going. We have to go to church and talk to God." And I'm like, Mom, I'm talking to God right now. Why do I have to go to church? And that was an underlying foundation that helped me along this journey. So the third experience, now we're going back into two not so great experiences as well, but it lays the foundation for you to see this arc of my story. And the third one was, I was in 9th grade. I was going to meet a friend in town, and I lived out in the county, so I had to ride my bike in town because my mom couldn't give me a ride. And there was a lot of construction, so I had to pick my way through the construction on a bike, and I didn't know, but I was being followed. So I picked up my girlfriend, who was right off the road. It wasn't too far. And we went into town, and we went to one of the stores in town. There was a shopping area that we were going to. What ended up happening is in the first shop, I got a phone call, and a shopkeeper came up to me and said to me, "There's a phone call for you." And I'm like, This was long before cell phones, so I didn't know what was going on. So I went and answered the phone because I'm like, okay. And on the other end, all I heard was heavy breathing. No, that's a little freaky for someone like me. So then my girlfriend was with me, and she calmed me down, and she goes, "All right, let's just go finish our errands, and then we'll go home. We'll stay at my house." So we went to a second shop. And in that shop, it was the Hallmark store. We're laughing at all the cards and reading them and looking at everything. And all of a sudden I hear the phone ring again. And he describes me specifically and asks and says it's my uncle. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it might be my Uncle Steve. I hope everything's okay. I hope my mom's okay. And I go and answer the phone. And then he starts saying really crude and lewd things to me. And again, scream, drop the phone. The shopkeeper grabs me and says, "Are you okay?" And my friend is like, "All right, one last stop and we're going home." And we go to one other shop, and we're actually going to the candy counter for snacks. And my girlfriend hears the phone ring again. She goes, "Don't have her pick that up until I tell you." And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, the shopkeeper comes, no, this phone's for you, and hands the phone to me. And she goes, "Don't answer it yet. Give me a minute." And she runs off, which really panicked me. And she ran around the corner, and she knew where the public phone was. And there's a man standing there on the phone, and he sees her coming, and he takes off. And she runs after him. And I couldn't believe what was happening. She was running, and I'm standing there, I'm like screaming practically. I was really upset. And she comes running back, and she goes, "I couldn't catch him, and there was nobody out there to help me in the parking lot," which was very odd. So in that incident, it just reinforced my experience of what happened with the trusted neighbor. There was, why am I drawing this kind of attention to myself? And there was so much shame, and it wasn't safe to be me. Here I was going into town with my friend, excited about wearing my new outfit and having fun, and look at what happened. Something's wrong. So the fourth incident was what I called the Sybil incident. I think it was about a year or two later. So I was probably a sophomore or junior in high school. And I realized that I went to a movie, and that movie happened to be Sybil. It was a story about a woman who was physically and emotionally abused by her mother, and she had split personalities, and she had voices in her head. And I'm like, okay. I walked out of there, and I could feel it in my whole body. I was so upset. And I remember thinking to myself, I have voices in my head. I have 3. Now, after looking at it, I had my own voice. I had my ego that was very competitive at that point in my life and very loud. And the third voice was this soft, almost whisper in my head that sometimes it was a feeling in my body, and other times it was like, "Now do this." And it would guide me in my decisions for everything from what am I going to take in school to, oh yeah, date that person. And it was so comical because it felt so good. But all of a sudden, these 3 voices were looking like they were dangerous after seeing this movie. and I completely shut down my connection. I shut down my connection to whatever that was. At that point, I had no idea. It was just something that was normal to me. And it dimmed my light. It was dangerous to be me again. And so I shut down and I disconnected. So fast forward. I go finish high school. I go to undergraduate. I get a degree in marketing and sales. And my first job out of college is working for a hotel chain in a really down market at the time. And as I'm doing this, I'm like, I like the marketing part, but I absolutely hate the sales part. It didn't feel right. And at that time, I didn't realize how empathic I am, because everything was about the feel of that job. It just didn't fit. It was like putting on the wrong size shoes. And so I said, okay, enough of that. I'll move on with my life. And I went to grad school and became a CPA. Okay, so the American dream is right in front of me. I'm grabbing for that brass ring. I have the education. I have the job. I have the money coming in. I have the prestige of having a high-powered job. And I was going up the ladder in the corporation pretty quickly because I had this other experience in another industry that they valued. So I'm thinking, okay, this is great. I had been there for several years. And all of a sudden I'm looking around. I'm like, do you feel this way? I almost asked my cohorts, but I didn't. And all of a sudden I'm like, okay, so I'm really good at numbers, but I'm bored out of my gourd. And I'm like, okay, what else? This is really what life is about? It didn't make any sense to me. And I'm like, but I feel so empty inside. So incredibly empty inside. So this really was the part of my life where I'm like, there's a big mismatch here. This is what I think life is supposed to look like if this were a picture. And this is what it's really like for me. There's a mismatch. They don't match at all. And they don't even come close to matching. It's like, so this is a way in which I started looking, a lens through which I started looking at my life. Like, where does it match up and where doesn't it? And right after I finished grad school and as I was working in the Big Six accounting firm, I became a self-help junkie. And I was out of school, having a little more time to read, and I came across some information about the subconscious. So I had read a pretty superficial article about the subconscious. And what I learned here was that there's basically, the way I view it, 3 levels to our mind. There's the conscious mind, which is that 5% shown. There's the subconscious mind, which is that 95% shown. And then there's the superconscious, which some people call the higher self. I call it God. Other people are triggered by that word, so they'll call it the divine or source or universe. And if you notice, superconscious actually flows through the conscious and the subconscious mind. It's all around us. And so Western society in general tends to work from the conscious mind. I'm the decision maker. I'm the goal maker. I'm going to do this. This is the action. This is the analysis part of us. And what really intrigued me was more about the subconscious mind. I'm like, look at that. 95% of our mind is below our knowing. I don't think about pumping my heart. Do you? Have you ever driven home at night and realized you're in the driveway and you're like, how did I get here? That's your subconscious protecting you and getting you home safely. So there's motor functions, there's belief systems, there's our identity and our habits and all the programming that we received. And anything from emotions to traumas to fears and memories. And so this whole idea of this iceberg representation of the subconscious became into my awareness. And I'm like, what? This is how life works? Wait a minute. I did everything right. I reached for that brass ring. And I thought to myself, I feel like I'm getting in my own way. I'm really feeling stuck. And so I started to observe. I got super curious, and I started to observe and question everything, which is pretty big for a rule follower. So I stepped onto the next step of my path, in which I quit the Big Six firm. I started a family and I became a stay-at-home mom. And I really focused on the spiritual aspect, and I call it my spiritual explosion phase of my life, in which it seemed like messages were coming at me from everywhere, through movies, through conversations, through going to church, through whatever I was reading. And I focused on several things. I studied Christianity in depth. I studied Buddhism because I was really curious. I read a book called Living Buddha, Living Christ that I absolutely loved. So I had to go down that rabbit hole. I read the Tao. I had conversations with friends of mine that are Persian about the Quran. And I decided I want a personal relationship with God. And God, I need you to help me. I need you to guide me. By then I had 3 kids. And the interesting thing was, as I'm watching them grow up, I'm noticing that they have some of my, what I would call not very good traits, like lack of self-confidence at that time. And I'm like, wait, this is just not good. Despite raising my kids exactly opposite from the way I was raised, I didn't want them to be miserable because of the thoughts that I kept thinking in my head and the way in which I approached life at times, because I didn't like the way I reacted to things sometimes. So that prayer went out, please guide me, please help me. And then I had the audacity to make, this one's really funny, I had the audacity to make a deal with God. And I said, if I hear something 3 times, I will listen. I will listen really well. And so then I went through all of these experiences again through, it seemed like every time I went to church, the sermon was directly for me and it hit me right here in the third eye. And I would have conversations with different girlfriends and the same information would come through again. So I was really listening hard to my life, my words, and what my thoughts were. So it was clear I was living someone else's idea of what success is and what life is and what the American dream was. And after learning what we just learned about the subconscious, I started to get a little mad because I looked at that word programmed and I'm like, what exactly does that mean? That part was hard for me. And how do I change this? Change is hard. That's what I was taught anyway. So the next step was for me to spend 18 months in talk therapy. And I had the greatest therapist. After 18 months, what I realized is he showed me my patterns of how I was approaching life and thinking about life and gave me a different perspective of things. But at the end of that 18 months, I was still depressed because I'd gone to him because I was experiencing what everybody else was calling depression. For me, it was just what was always in my head. And then, literally, I stopped with my last therapist appointment with him. And then I'm sitting in carpool line and I'm talking to a girlfriend. And she says to me, well, Kris, you help us out so much. You know all of this stuff and you've helped me. And I know you've helped 3 of our other friends. But it doesn't seem as if you're applying what you know to your own life. And this is when life got magical. 3 days later, my husband was invited by one of his clients to go to a class that was psychologically based and was had components of spirituality in it. And in this class, we had to be separated. That was just the rule. You couldn't sit next to your spouse. And I'm sitting in the back of the room and I'm listening to everything, the concepts I knew from being the self-help junkie. I'm listening to the concepts and I'm realizing, they're giving me how to apply it to my life. And I had this sensation, this was the wildest thing. I felt as if all the pearls from those books that I read or even courses that I took were being strung along with these golden beads, and that there was this beautiful strand of beads, pearls of wisdom, that I could now apply to my life. And I'm very auditory. I'm not very visual at that time anyway. And I experienced that visually, so it really caught my attention. So fast forward 1 week. I know it's a lot of details. Fast forward 1 week. And we're in a breakout session from this class. And I have a woman turn to me after we had finished what we were supposed to do. And she goes, Kris, I really think you should look into something called PSYCH-K. I can't really explain much about it because I'm just starting to learn it, but I think you should look at it. And the hair on my forearms and the back of my neck raised, and I could feel goosebumps. I'm like, ooh, what's this about? And then 3 days later, I'm in the grocery store talking to a woman in the supplement department who I've known. And we're talking about things. I talked about the class that I was taking, and she goes, hey, you should take this class. It's really great. It's called PSYCH-K. And it was like everything around me was electrical. And it was like, ooh, I can't even really explain it. I never felt it like that before in my life. And I'm like, okay, I'm paying attention. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it does, but I'm in. Talk about magic, the way in which it came into my life. It was quite fun. So at that point in my life, 3 kids, not much family support around because they lived in another state. I had a pretty chaotic life. I was physically exhausted. I was emotionally overloaded. And I noticed within me these jumbled emotions, and that I was at times living in the past, and I couldn't let go of hurt, and I was basically stuck. And all of this was this path that led me here. And I started to see what they were talking about programming that I had read in that article it had to be at least 2 years prior. And I saw how my thoughts and my reactions, the way in which I approached life, all the way back from when I was a little girl, was creating my life in a totally different way. And so then next came life after PSYCH-K, the awakening, I call that phase. And so PSYCH-K came to me in a very magical way, and how it showed up, but it became my lifeline to becoming who I wanted to become. And I realized helped me return to my true self. I was able to go from this chaotic within to calm within. I was connected. I started trusting myself again. That one was huge. There was so many times that I let someone else override my own decisions because I didn't trust myself. But with PSYCH-K, recognizing what was in my subconscious completely changed that. And for the first time in my life, I stepped into something called self-love, which was a new experience for me. I don't recall that I ever felt self-love before, except for maybe when I was a child, but it wasn't consciously knowing that. So PSYCH-K helped me piece my life together my way. And the fear went away. The fear of being me went away. And I let go of being the people pleaser and the perfectionist. Yeah, I'm still recovering from that every now and then. But that perfectionist piece sort of went away. I gave myself the grace to make mistakes. And I started to dial up my light again. Remember when you were a kid? Well, maybe not. But there was a song, This Little Light of Mine, I'm Gonna Let It Shine. I started dialing up my light again. And I had let go of so many things that brought me to this place. And my limiting beliefs were starting to transform. And PSYCH-K completely transformed my life and the life of my family.
Kris, I mean, that's the most amazing story. A lot of that I'd never heard before. And thank you, by the way, for sharing that. Have you shared this story before? You really have, it down really well.
Bits and pieces of it, But this is the most comprehensive, where I really, even going back and looking over it, I realized, oh, this is really big stuff. And this really shaped the way in which I lived my life before Psych-K.
Well, going back and re-examining is sometimes the most, healthy thing you can do. It really bubbles the essence to the surface, and it allows you to draw attention to it and then even heal from it even more.
Exactly.
And, going into Psych-K now, I'd love to hear about that. I've heard of Special K, cereal, but Psych-K, and I'm sure it's special also, but I'd love to hear about that. It sounds like it made a profound effect in your world. Can you share those details?
Sure, absolutely. So Psych-K is a profound group of processes that, and it's actually a thought form that we use to change self-limiting beliefs into life-enhancing beliefs. And so it helps us to rewire and rewrite. Rewire our subconscious and rewrite our story, so we can create life the way we want it to be, rather than living someone else's ideas through us. When I was going through this phase of, wouldn't it be nice if someone would have handed us a manual on how to be human, how to figure everything out, rather than bumping along in our families, against our friends, in our reactions. And how can I figure this out? And so this information, I call it the belief creation process. This information is actually from Bruce Lipton, and Bruce Lipton is a PhD that wrote the book, The Biology of Belief, which I fully recommend everybody read. It's an awesome book. And what Bruce teaches, this is my distillation of what he talked about. As humans, we have an experience. Once we have that experience, we have a perception of that experience. So I couldn't put that in there very easily. So I'll just continue. So we have an experience, we have a perception of that experience, and then we have some thoughts about that experience. Well, then what ends up happening is we have those thoughts over and over and over again. Well, that's just a belief. A belief is a thought that you think over and over. Then the belief gives us the framework from which we have reactions and behaviors, pushes our biology based on what we believe. So Rob Williams, who is the originator of Psych-K, I'm going to pull up the quote, "Your beliefs create your reality." So when I read Bruce's book and I'm looking at this, I'm like, oh, so this is how it really works. To be human, it's about creating our reality. And how do we do that? We do that with our belief systems. I had a mentor a long time ago ask me, what are your belief systems? And I'm like, what are you talking about? Do you mean my character? Do you mean the qualities that I think that I have? And she just sort of giggled. We're very good friends now. And she sort of giggled at me and she goes, no, what do you believe? And I could come up with some things, but I couldn't get what she was getting at. And interestingly enough, she sent me a verse from the Bible, and I don't have the actual citing of that, but what it says is, "It is done unto you as you believe." I'll have to look that up. And I'm like, oh, well, this is interesting. And Psych-K, as I went through the process of learning Psych-K and these processes, what I found is that it really helped me put those two pieces of my life together, the being human part and being the spiritual being that's having a human experience. And I integrated my life so that I was able to move those self-limiting beliefs out of my life completely and start to live from a different place. And so it's a really fast and efficient, spiritually based way that delivers psychological, emotional, and spiritual benefits. And even for me, because I'm empathic and I feel things a lot of times, I can feel things leaving my body or being neutralized. I call it the emotional charge, being taken off of experiences. And it updates our programming. It updates what we are living from. So for me, it's the alignment and the harmonizing of the mind. And so Psych-K is also one of the best things I love about PSYCH-K is that as a facilitator, I get to serve people. What I found is that there is a part of PSYCH-K when you take the class and become a facilitator is that you're an Isumutak, which means the keeper of the sacred space where wisdom is revealed. So baked into the premise of PSYCH-K is that the wisdom is within you already, and all that matters is bringing it to the surface and helping to transform into that wisdom. And so I get the privilege to hold the space for my clients, and I get the honor to guide them and watch them transform their world and watch that transformation unfold. And many times we are led where to go. Sometimes we're not allowed to do. So the change mechanism in PSYCH-K is balance. Sometimes we're not allowed to do certain balances because something else is of higher priority. And the whole point of PSYCH-K is to come into a whole brain state, which allows us to use both hemispheres of our brain and the corpus callosum between the two hemispheres and look at something from a new perspective, from a wholeness. And that's what they call the whole brain state. And there's also a permission and commitment piece of PSYCH-K that I absolutely love. And that is we get permission from your higher self and we get commitment from your subconscious before we move on. I had experienced so many times in my life, and this isn't taking away from anything, but the practitioners, I had realized I was giving up my power, the power within me, and going to practitioners, but I didn't necessarily understood what they were doing. So I felt like I couldn't fully get behind what was going on. And what I love about PSYCH-K is that there was this permission and commitment, and I'm just the guide. The wisdom comes from the clients. And also another thing I love is that the hallmark of PSYCH-K is that you're open and curious. And I learned that throughout, before PSYCH-K and after, and started questioning from the little rule follower all the way to the being open and say, well, let's see where that takes us. To me, that is one of the coolest things about PSYCH-K. So that's pretty much what PSYCH-K is about. It's a one-to-one process, and it can profoundly change your life.
So Kris, what does PSYCH-K stand for? The K in it must mean something.
So PSYCH-K actually means, in the psych part is about the mind, and K is the key. The key, K-E-Y, key. And so PSYCH-K is the key to changing your subconscious. So that's what PSYCH-K means. It's mind with keys.
Well, that's a great description of it. You know, when I go back to your chart there, where you had belief in there, it makes me think belief. And what do you believe? You know, and really, if I was to sort of finish that statement, I'd say, what do you believe to be true? Right? And so when you were, you've heard this before, from sort of being born till 7 years old, you're a sponge and you're kind of a recorder and you're learning everything. And, Santa Claus is coming. Okay, well, then I believe that to be true. There must be a Santa Claus. That's one of my beliefs. What do you believe? And then later on you go, oh, sorry about that Santa Claus thing. It's not, so it's just the thing we had to do when you were little, I guess. I'm not sure why. But it's like, what do I believe to be true? Now, if someone suggested to me that I'm not worthy or I have all these negative sort of self-emotions, well, I might believe those to be true. And those are pretty darn limiting, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
And maybe I have other ones where I do have confidence. And so I believe, through experience that I can do certain things and so on. So what do I believe to be true? I think you have to examine those. But like you said, subconscious mind, how did I get home? Who drove the car? I was daydreaming the entire time. Somebody drove me home, right? Well, the subconscious mind was programmed for years on how to drive the car. It managed to get you all the way home while your conscious mind was busy doing something else. And that's pretty cool. But guess what? That's super ingrained. So if you also have limiting beliefs, believed to be truths, right? And then you've got to reprogram those. For some folks, it's just so hard. There's so much work. And you have to decide what's the process for doing that. Okay. So it's like, okay, I got it. I've got limiting beliefs that are ingrained in my subconscious. They've been programmed for years. They're stuck there. But if I really, really, really want to get rid of them, I'm going to have to focus my conscious mind on reprogramming those son of a guns and changing those in immense ways so that I can then live on new programming and enjoy life so much better.
All of it rings true. And there is the way I look at it. Remember when I told you I was feeling stuck in life? I didn't know that I was being run from a shame aspect. It was just something that happened to me. It wasn't something that I thought I embodied, but at a subconscious level, it was a big enough event that there was this trauma in my life that was running part of me, and I had no idea that I was carrying around that much shame. And even new layers of it has come up. Even writing my story, I found that there were things that I'm like, oh, I might want to go look at that again, because it was really pivotal in the way in which I presented myself today. And I'm like, I know I've worked around this way. There's different ways to look at the perceptions and the ways in which we live our lives. And that is absolutely true. Everything you said was absolutely true.
Well, I wonder if it would make sense to take some examples. Now, you wouldn't name the clients, but maybe you might talk about some folks that came to you with some limiting beliefs and some practices that you exercised with them and things maybe they took home to share what that experience might feel like.
So one of the most impactful experiences that I had was when I worked with a gentleman that was in the Special Forces. What was really important for him was that, first of all, he had cancer and he knew that he had a limited time. And he had 3 things that he wanted to work on. One was money coming in because he wanted to set up his family. Number 2, he was wanting to address some of the shame that he felt, even though he was serving his country proudly. And number 3 was that he wanted to come to peace with where he was headed. And he didn't have peace having those 3 things outstanding in his life. So we used PSYCH-K balances. He was very much a feeler, and we used PSYCH-K balances to come to peace and non-attachment, not only with the cancer, as well as this money issue. So that part was actually pretty funny, in which he wanted to make a certain amount of money within a certain amount of time, and so that he could set his family up for success when he was gone. And we went through some processes about his beliefs around money. And 95% of what he wanted materialized. And this was 3 years before this gentleman passed. But perhaps the biggest thing out of this was that he was able to come to peace about everything that was happening in his life. And that was such an honor and a privilege to facilitate for, because there was so much going on in his life. So that's a pretty little bit heavy example. Another example that is a little lighter and a little more fun is I was working with a circus artist, and her job required her to do something called a round-off back tuck. And she hated tumbling. Matter of fact, she even said to me, wow, tumbling wrecks my body. So lo and behold, a week before this person was supposed to leave for her contract, her wrist hurt. And I'm like, okay, well, this is what you just told me. What do you want instead? And basically what happened is we balanced around that my body likes tumbling. And she's like, oh, I don't know what this is about. Okay, all right, just let's do it. Which was sort of comical at the time. What ended up happening is she went on an 11-month contract in which she tumbled just about every day on that contract. Matter of fact, one time, 29 days straight with 4 shows a day in which she was tumbling. So it was this experience for her to recognize that her own words were creating her world, and that her body listened. Her body was saying, oh, if I tumble, it hurts my body. And it completely changed by going in and using a PSYCH-K balance. And she went through an 11-month contract with very little pain. And that is, most of the pain was from the rest of her experience there. And that's the part that was so magical for her. So those are two examples, one lighter, one a little bit heavier, but it shows you whatever the person brings forth in a session, a lot of times we're led to where they need to go for themselves, and we hold the intention of what the client wants.
Got it. So you had programmed yourself over years to believe that to be true.
Yes.
And then ingrained. And then you had examined it, put a spotlight on it, and somehow reprogrammed it to believe that it is not true. So then you probably have to kind of crank it in there as tight and as hard and repetitively as you can so that it sticks, I would think, so that is in your subconscious.
Actually, not really. That's why PSYCH-K is so wonderful. There are many modalities out there that can help you, because our subconscious, how things get programmed is by repetition. But what's so wonderful about PSYCH-K is that it's really fast and it's efficient. And so there is different levels of awareness that can change how you do a balance. But really, it's anywhere from 2 minutes to 5 minutes. And you have the entire way in which to do a PSYCH-K balance, and it's changed. They've even shown through an EEG the difference in your brain after you've done from before a balance to after a balance, and that there are changes in the brain regarding that. So it can be very fast.
Yeah, and that's the most amazing thing because, we would say that all the subconscious programming that happened earlier in your years was repetitive, as you mentioned. You do it over and over and it locks in. And yet you would think, okay, if I have to reprogram it, I have to be as repetitive with something else and replace it. But you're saying with this technique, that's not the case.
No, a lot of times we don't know what is actually written in our subconscious. You and I may look at the same situation and doesn't bother you at all, but it would bother me, and I write something, make it mean something, and put it into my subconscious. But you're like, whatever. So we don't know exactly how all of that is recorded. And so that's the beauty of PSYCH-K, is because we are actually led through the client's inner wisdom about what's not working to how do I make something work for me. So the balance is the change mechanism for rewriting that record in the subconscious. And a balance usually takes 6 to 7 steps, if I remember correctly. And there is different steps. For example, we use applied kinesiology for establishing communication with the clients. Then there is a pre-testing of the goal. So in that particular case, the testing of the circus artist, it would be, the pre-testing of the goal would be, my body likes to tumble. One of the things that I like best is that there's a permission and commitment protocol within PSYCH-K. And what that does is say to higher self, God, superconscious, it says it's safe and appropriate to do this. There's commitment, and you use muscle testing to confirm. And then the commitment part is from the subconscious, which is what balance can we use to do this? Because there's several balances that could be possible. And then there's a post-test in which we find out, yep, this rewrote into the subconscious. And there's a big part that most people don't do, especially as we get older, is a celebration of who we are and what you just did within the session. So those are some of the steps that are followed, and that's the change mechanism.
It goes back to your chart about experiences, thoughts, and beliefs. Mm-hmm. And of course, that one in between there which was perceptions, right?
Yes.
So if you and I are in the same room witnessing something, we might, experience physically the same thing that happened. We might have different perceptions, which gives us different thoughts, and certainly walk away with different beliefs.
Yeah. I actually had an experience with 2 sisters, and we were working through money. So I worked with them separately. And what was interesting was that one sister had walked away with her ideas about money in a very positive way. And the sister walked away with everything negative about money. And I'm like, they were brought up in the same household. They're not that far apart in age. How could they walk? And you could see the disparity in their life from one end of the spectrum to the other in how they managed their money, how they lived their life, the things that they did. And that one was the most mind-blowing. That one was early on I've been doing PSYCH-K now 14 years. And that was very early on that I experienced that. And it was, wow, it was mind-blowing.
Well, I can imagine that. You imagine two sisters that are daughters, and maybe the father pulls out his wallet and they want some ice cream, and he's only got $5 left on him. That's it. And so he decides to use the $5 to get them ice cream. And one daughter thinks, Dad is so generous. I just love him. And the other daughter thinks, how irresponsible. The last $5 he spent on ice cream, my goodness, my college education is going down the drain. They're going to be thinking about this completely differently. And yet, it was the same experience, different perception, different thoughts, different beliefs of what's true and what's not. Programming, it's a crazy world out there. But what I want to do is I want to shift gears from thoughts and I want to go to the heart. Okay? So I have this segment here called Heart's First Whisper. So I have some questions that I've prepackaged and I've got them custom built just for you. And as I share them with you, open your heart and don't use your mind. And I think, you can do this for sure. Is that right?
I'm game. Let's play.
It is like a kind of a game show, isn't it, Randy? Here we go. The first question is, what does spiritual truth mean to you now? And how can someone begin to find it for themselves?
So spiritual truth is, for me, what feels right in my heart. When I connect my mind and heart and I sync them and I just have that gut feeling and that intuition of knowing, yes, this is how it works. This is my truth. How can someone begin to find that for themselves? Part of that is the self-discovery of what your beliefs are. Part of that is also, I'm a feeler, so I'm going to say feel into what is true for you and question and be curious and open about it and say, does that really work for me? No, but if I tweak it this way, that is my spiritual truth.
That's great. It's like a coherence between your mind and your heart. And then I liked how you said intuition also. So many people have this intuition within them that's trying to help them, guide them, but they don't listen to it. And when you can tune into that, it can really help you. Now, I remember you earlier saying, if I hear something 3 times, not only is my intuition rising, but 3 times is probably enough for me to get my attention.
Well, and I resemble that remark. There's this whole idea of, wait a minute, I have to listen to what's right for me. And this whole idea of what is truth for me. And that is absolutely nailed it.
Nail it, yeah. And truth for me, but is that an old truth, and do I need to fix that truth? And that's what PSYCH-K can certainly help you with, which takes us into number 2 here, which is when do you feel most in the is space, where everything flows?
That's when I'm playing with the client in the space of PSYCH-K, the thought form of PSYCH-K. What I found is I have so much fun, and there's this flow that I experience. So I use PSYCH-K daily for myself. And one of my favorite space, the is space, is playing with clients and helping them to transform and find out their truths. So that's really good. That and meditation is space.
Is space. Yeah, I would imagine you're probably sitting there with a client and they're sharing an experience and a belief, and you know how to process with them and take them on a path that really is going to help them. And I would imagine sometimes you might even go, oh my God, that's going to help me too. I hadn't thought about that before.
One of the things that I love best about it is because I hold the space for the transformation, is that literally from every client I learn something really important, and I'll balance for myself as soon as the session is over.
Oh, yeah, I can see that for sure. On these podcasts that I host, these conversations we have, always happens. Something pops up and it's like, OMG, I hadn't thought of that. Which takes us into number 3 here, which is, what's a belief you released that completely changed your life?
I had always heard in my life and reading the 4 agreements that don't take anything personally. And for probably 40 some years of my life, I'm like, what does that mean? Of course I'm going to take things personally. What does that mean? And I had an experience where I understood finally that a lot of times people are in reaction because of what's going on inside of them, not anything that I personally did. So I did a lot of belief work around that. And so I released this idea that I have to take everything personally. And it completely changed my life. I worry so much less than what I used to.
Can you name all 4 of those 4 agreements?
Oh, it's been so long since I read it. No, but I got the book right over there. You want me to grab it?
Well, I got a cheat sheet in front of me also, so I'll just knock them off here because everybody should realize, be impeccable with your word.
Mm-hmm.
Very deliberate and surgical with the words that you share because words are so powerful. Don't take anything personally. If someone comes to you with negative energy, don't accept the gift, right?
Yeah.
And don't make assumptions. If they didn't actually say it, don't finish their thoughts and sentences for them. The 4th one is always do your best.
Yeah. Thank you for reminding me of those because they're good ones. I might need to put them up closer in my office for me to see rather than in the book.
Oh, you can't go wrong with those, that's for sure. And now we go off to number 4, which is what does listening to God look or feel like for you now?
Well, you had pointed out earlier those 3, if I hear something 3 times, a lot of times I don't need 3 times anymore. Listening to God for me is having that mind and heart coherence and being in a place of openness and quiet where I can actually hear or feel what is coming through. So that's what it is for me.
So a stillness, to allow the mind and the heart to speak through, the intuition to rise and for you to recognize it and go, thank you for helping me once again. Well, that takes us to number 5 is what do you want to say to the version of you who was trying so hard to be perfect?
Part of me wants to say, oh, honey, it's okay. It's okay to make mistakes and learn from them. You don't have to be perfect because it's so crushingly limiting to be perfect. And that's what I would say to her. Be you. Forget about the rest.
In the business world, there's a phrase that says, perfect is the enemy of good, right?
Yeah.
So if you don't stop until it's perfect, you're probably not productive enough. You're not getting enough good out because you're trying to just do perfect. So that's kind of a business slant on it. But the notion of perfect is something that's kind of unachievable, really.
Exactly.
And realize that.
Yeah.
So number 6, what's a message you feel called to share with those struggling to reconnect with their intuition?
Get curious. Observe the way you're thinking and the words you're using. And allow yourself, that's a big word for me, allow yourself the grace to follow what you know is best.
Yes, and then probably to visit PSYCH-K for additional assistance, yes. I know I threw the plug in there now, not you, so I think that's fair. And we'll follow up with our final question here, which is about PSYCH-K, is how has PSYCH-K helped you remember who you really are?
I had to go through that process of myself, and part of that was in my story arc when I was explaining I started to get curious and I stopped being a rule follower. And so in my journey, I started blowing off some of these ways of looking at myself and my life and balanced for them with PSYCH-K, and it completely changed my life.
And it's amazing how you work there and you're in the business of changing other people's lives, but it's changing your life just as much, if not more.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so obviously you're living your spiritual truth now, not being a CPA, not doing, selling, various things or even in marketing to some degree, but now you're literally living your spiritual truth. So,
Absolutely.
So congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Hey, and before we wrap up, Kris, can you share with the listeners how they can connect with you if they feel called to explore this work further?
The best way to get in touch with me is I am on the facilitator list at PSYCH-K International. So that is at www.psychk PSYCH-K, PSYCH-K.com. And there's a listing of facilitators there, and my name is Kris, with a K, Vallin, V as in victory, Allin. That's one way to reach me. The second way is just to email me. I'm at krisvallin@icloud.com, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, I'll post both of those, the link and the email address, and put some screen share up on the screen so folks can see that, so they'll be able to find you just fine. Thank you, Kris.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, Kris, thank you for not just being here today with me, but for the courage and the heart you've brought to your own journey. It's been so meaningful to me to witness your transformation over the years, from the friend I grew up with to someone who's now holding sacred space for others to heal and awaken.
Thank you so much, Brad. It's been such fun. Thank you.
And for everyone listening, if you take nothing else from today's conversation, remember this: you are not broken. Your subconscious mind isn't your enemy. It can be your greatest ally once it's aligned with the truth of who you really are. Wow, that's something to think about.
Well said.
This is a podcast recording I've been looking forward to a long time. We've known each other forever, and it's so amazing. I think it came off really well. I will post this, and there'll be a lot of comments, so I invite you to come back and join in the comments that come from this recording. Thank you for joining us on this profound journey. If you found this conversation enlightening, be sure to like, subscribe, and share, and definitely comment. Love the comments. And until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and go beyond the illusion to discover your true self. Take care, everyone, and bye for now.